if your machinery is broken, how the hell are you going to do all these things that I just said? You need a healthy mitochondria to do all of these things,
Yeah.
to a certain extent. If you're completely broken, of course you shouldn't do cold exposure. Of course, you won't be able to walk shirtless for, um, 30 minutes outside at 0 degrees Celsius, like I just did in the morning.
Usually tears down people who focus mainly on food, right? So people like Paul Saladino, the carnivore community, so on and so forth. He's just notorious for that, right? It's not about diet, it's about light. And I see you as a big diet guy. You focus a lot on
I used to be.
nutrition. Used to be.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd love to hear that change then, if you don't mind, just kind of explaining how things have changed since April.
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to understand how Cruz thinks. You realize that, the skin is extremely sensitive to light. You realize that the eyes are extremely sensitive to light. And you realize that every single photon that hits your body has a biochemical effect, a huge biochemical effect. And then how many times do we eat every day? I mean, for many people, you can say on average it's three. Well, in terms of light, as long as it's not dark outside and dark inside if you live inside, light is affecting you all the time, especially in modern society since we have artificial lights. So, which one is more significant, food or light? Light is going to be more significant in terms of health. It's the same thing. I can liken it to pollution. So, I made a video about the healthiest countries, and then I was talking about what's more important, clean water, clean food, or clean air. And I said, how many times do you drink water or shower a day? Well, quite a few times in terms of drinking water, especially if it's a hot country. How many times do you eat? Again, on average, 3 times. How many times do you breathe a day? In the thousands, isn't it? So, clean air is going to be more important. So, then you look at what food is, and food is a part of, light. It is light. In a sense, it's light that has been slowed down. That all that energy that's in food, it came from the sun. The sun is the Earth's uh, energy source. Light water magnetism. They are way more influential on us. You're affected by light constantly. You're made of 70% water, and the light affects the water. The magnetism also affects the water, and it affects your entire body because the Earth's magnetic field is constant. It gets weaker during the day, from what I understand, but it's affecting you constantly. And food is a little tiny part of light water magnetism. The overall environment is light water magnetism, and food is one part of the environment. And what people have decided to do is they've focused in on food, which is very significant. I'm not like Cruz. I will say that food is very significant. And most quantum biologists will say that food is very significant. And you cannot ignore it. You cannot do everything that Cruz says and ignore it for optimal health. You have to master it. However, is it the most important thing? Absolutely not. And when you think that it's the most important thing, you believe that you can prioritize food over everything else, and you can't really do that. You can't sit there and eat a raw primal diet and be inside all day uh, under artificial blue light. You can't do that. So
Mm.
Cruz, the reason why he goes after food gurus is because not because he doesn't think that food is important. I mean, read his book. It's very, a lot of it has to do with food. And he still recommends it. And he's fully aware of what's in his book. It's just that you have to master a bunch of other things in terms of health. You have to understand the water in your body. You have to understand how the entire electromagnetic spectrum, um, whether it's coming from natural sources or artificial sources in modern society, how that affects your body, how to avoid it, where it is, and you have to treat it with the same respect that you treat nutrition. You have to treat your body clock with the same respect that you treat nutrition. And that's how I've changed. Okay. As I told Cruz in the first interview, I told him that no, Cruz, I'm not a food guru. I care about everything that affects health, and I've always thought that food is significant. However, Now I see it as, I really see it as one pillar of health, but I see electromagnetism in general as way, way, way more important. That
Mm,
that's really how I see it. And then
mm,
another thing that's very advantageous with quantum biology, in terms of the way I think, I've always been not someone who relies on science, but I look at nature and I state obvious things about the body. Obviously, it prioritizes the brain above, let's say, the fat. Otherwise, when you fast, it would eat up the brain, uh, not the and not the fat. So there's an intelligent hierarchy. But is there a meta-analysis showing that the body has an intelligent hierarchy? No, but no one will dispute it. With quantum biology, it fits me really well because when you look at deuterium, for example, you can't argue with deuterium. Okay, you have high deuterium levels, you're going to get that in the mitochondria, and you're going to break the big spinning hydrogen gun. You're going to break those. You're going to damage them. You don't need a study to show that, or you just need one study to show that that's the case. And then whenever you find something that increases deuterium or is high in deuterium, you'll know that it's unhealthy. And you'll know that, for example, saturated animal fat that comes from healthy animals is really, really healthy because it's deuterium depleted. That has to be the case. I don't need a meta analysis um, showing me that saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease or animal fat doesn't cause heart disease. I know it's deuterium depleted. Um, this is how we work. This is our machinery, and so it checks out. Quantum biology is, you've got absolute truths there, sort of. You don't need to rely on data as much. You've got very concrete mechanisms, and it makes life easier when you try to explain these things to skeptics. Uh, that's sort of how I'm looking at it. And also, I didn't know about magnetism before. I didn't know how important it is, but then I listened to Dr. Dean Bonley's work. He has a lecture that he did in 2013, a two-part lecture, but the first part is really important. And what I got from it was that just like we use sunlight, we use magnetism as an energy source. Our mitochondria uses it to energize us. And the reason is because, from a physics standpoint, this is the way I understand it. When you have particles moving in a magnetic field, they move faster. Electrons move faster and protons move faster. And how do we make energy? Through electron and proton movement. So
mm,
you increase the strength of the magnetic field. That's adjacent. It has to be in the same direction as the Earth, of course. That's why artificial magnetic fields are bad, because they're not in the same direction, so they're going to do the opposite thing, and you've adapted to one magnetic field throughout, you know, um, the time, throughout the overwhelming majority of human existence. We've had the magnetic field going in one direction, affecting us in one way, and so that's how we're used to it. So the magnetic field is charging our electrons and our protons, and that's making energy production more efficient and more easy. So you need less food, and everything works more easily. You have more resources to give the brain, to give the liver, to give the heart, etc. And that
mm,
speeds up healing quite a lot. And that's why with Dean Bonley, he had this big fat magnetism chamber, and he brought in people with heart failure. Like they were on a respirator, they could barely move, they were in a wheelchair. He put them in there for like 11 days. Um, and then I know he was talking about how they went on vacation afterward. Like after 11 days, one of them said, "The only reason I came here is because I wanted to go on a vacation." So
mm.
she didn't stay for the full treatment. Her heart was so good after 11 days, no
Wow.
primal diet, no nothing. So good after 11 days that she went on the vacation with her friends without the wheelchair, without the respirator, which was really interesting. So magnetism has a huge effect on us, and I didn't know that. So now
Mm.
I know that because of studying quantum biology. That's basically it. That's how I'm thinking about things now.
Um, have you looked into Robert Obecker, Dr. Robert Obecker's work at all in the body electric
I
cruise
know
talk?
about it. I
You know
certainly
about
know
it.
about it.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I haven't read the book yet. I want to order it. I was actually
Uh,
looking at it yesterday, wanting to order it, but I have a book called Seasons of Life, also a recommendation by Dr. Jack Cruz, that's
okay,
coming in. So I respect each book I buy, so I have to read it first before I buy anything else.
gotcha. Seasons of Life, what's that one about?
It's about how organisms adapt to seasons,
Hmm.
like the biochemical changes that occur in us each season. I'll give you an example. So you might know that Cruz has a series called Cold Thermogenesis on his, on
Yeah.
his website. And in Cold Thermogenesis 6, he's talking about how our appetite for fat and carbohydrates changes based on how much cold exposure we do. So when the winter comes and we get colder, we'll naturally want to eat more fat. We have mechanisms in us that make us want to eat more fat and that lessen our carbohydrate cravings. And that's for a healthy human living in nature without any interference, of course. Otherwise, those mechanisms don't work um, because you won't be exposed to the same elements. And if you're not exposed to the same elements, the same systems won't activate. But we have those systems in us, and we have very uh, delicate systems that control our biochemistry based on the season. So for one day, for one 24-hour cycle, that's the circadian rhythm, of course. There's also something called the circannual rhythm, and that's a 365-day rhythm that repeats. So you've
Hmm.
got the micro one, which is the 24-hour one, and then you've got the macro one, which is the 365 one. When I was doing research for my Dr. Robert Moreed interview, sorry, Martin Moreed, I came across the term, and just coming across the term was so fascinating. And then I see that book on Cruz's Twitter. He had a picture with 6 books, and I said, "Oh, he hasn't talked about these books."
Hmm.
And then I found one of the books. I was looking up all the books, and they're super expensive, of course, because they're out of print. But I found Seasons of Life for $11, so I got it.
Hmm.
That's why
Yeah.
I'm going to read it.
Okay, awesome. Um, Super interesting stuff. Yeah, I definitely want to check that out. I want to ask you, so I've been on this journey as well in trying to make sense of Cruz's work, or I guess we can call it alternative ways of looking at the human body, and alternative not being like it's less true than mainstream scientific views on the human body, but just different ways of looking at it than what our institutions at universities, at academia usually look, how academia usually looks at it. And I've come across similar things, saying like there aren't a bunch of randomized controlled clinical trials showing what Cruz is talking about. For example, this deuterium affecting ATP synthase, like you mentioned, but just having one study showing that you could kind of like use inductive reasoning, kind of make this logical leap. Okay, of course, fitting everything together in a grand picture, this would be bad for our health. And this is a very different way, I think, of doing science and of understanding the human body. And I talked to Scott Carney. Are you familiar with Scott Carney at all?
No,
Okay, so Scott Carney is like this researcher that looks into science and this kind of stuff, and he's closer to someone who just believes in, okay, what do the randomized controlled clinical trials and the meta-analyses say, and that's the point of truth. And everyone in their head obviously has a hierarchy of what is the absolute core of truth, or what is um, your hierarchy of the methods to obtain truth. And I think for a lot of people, randomized controlled clinical trials are at their very top, but and for others like Jack Cruz, it's something like nature, right? It's having evolution, or the story of evolution, as your main, right? You're always fitting things into a story. It's never this isolated thing. And if results from a randomized controlled trial don't fit into a grand story of our evolution, such as sunlight, right? Right. These dermatological studies showing that sunlight is bad for our health, but in the grand scheme of things, you look around and say, how has all life evolved under Earth, under the sun?
By the way, it's not it's like what they do is they put UV in isolation. That's how they make the studies. It's not even
Exactly,
sunlight.
exactly. So it's showing there's you know, we're all doing a guessing game here. We're all trying to understand reality, and for some, they immediately just gravitate and it becomes this holy grail of truth, which is randomized controlled trials. But for others, and I would include myself as well, no, nature is the fundamental axiom of where we derive truth. So if a randomized controlled clinical trial is not in line with that, then the trial is wrong. Then there's a methodological problem with those studies. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I've been having this journey as well and trying to make sense of things. And I'll just say this, okay, before I want to hear your answer. My hierarchy of truth, number one is subjective experience. So if something happens within my subjective reality, personal reality, and I experience it firsthand, whether it's doing a diet or traveling to a certain latitude and experiencing health benefits, that's highest form of truth. Second is nature. Third is randomized controlled clinical trials. So how would you rank your hierarchy of truth?
My job is to make people healthy. And so when you say that your subjective experience is number one, for me at least, I really can't do that because for me, I'd know that it works for me. But my body is subject to certain factors, a certain environment, certain requirements based on its history, based on my genes, based on a bunch of things. And another body is subject to a completely different environment, even if, it's my mother, let's say. Let's say my mother was at the same age, she was eating the same diet, she was doing the same things as me, similar genes. Still, uh, she'd have to look at her own subjective experience. And so I cannot apply my own subjective experience on other people.
Hmm.
Um, then, in terms of truth in general, I mean, outside of health, everything is a distinction. There is, you interpret everything, and all this stuff that goes on in the mind, you're basically drawing on a board, and that's it. It has nothing to do with the nature of reality. But in terms of the human intellectual world, you have to look at various examples of human beings all across the world to be able to draw health conclusions. And this is why I bring up nutrition and physical degeneration in almost every single large video that I make. And the reason is because I know for a fact that all those humans are healthy in all their different environments. So then I look at the links. And when I look at the links, I understand what every single human should be doing. And I'll tell you what it is that that is really really important in terms of health. You have to live in the environment that humans have been the most exposed to throughout the overwhelming majority of their existence. If you radically change our environment, that's when you create disease. That is, you could sort of say that that's nature, that's following nature's laws. I see it as we're built a certain way, and you have to follow the manual. And when you change the environment that we're in, you're going to get problems because you're going against the manual. We're not. We have if RF, if radio frequency hasn't been a part of our environment, then obviously RF is unhealthy. If sunlight has been a part of our environment, then obviously sunlight is healthy, etc. If for the overwhelming majority of our existence we've only eaten locally, then you have to eat locally. If for the overwhelming majority of our existence we've only consumed animal foods, or a diet that's very heavy in animal foods, then obviously you have to continue doing that. You can't change that up and think that breaking nature's laws is going to, you know, not come with consequences. So that's the way I think about it.
Hmm.
I If you want to make it simple, you start with that book, and then you continue. And then when you look at all the quantum biological whatever, it's all followed in that book. It's all
Mm,
present in that book. You just have to decipher it. And then the more you understand how the environment affects humans, the more you can look at modern society and understand what it is you need to change. Because you can read nutrition and physical degeneration, and you might not understand how their environment how the environments are different. But every little teeny tiny thing is relevant there.
mm, mm.
That's how I look at it.
Okay. Um, it also seems that you've changed your mind. I think I remember in our last podcast, you weren't really fond of cold exposure. Right?
Yes, that's something I should have mentioned in the beginning. You want me to get
Yeah.
straight into it?
Sure, yeah.
Yes. So before I used to think that what you're doing is you're forcing your body to create a lot of heat, and so you're using up the machinery, you're using up the energy. However, what I didn't realize was, first of all, let's just begin here. Cold exposure is unnatural if it's not a part of your environment. So for me, right now, I see a bunch of snow outside. It's 0 degrees Celsius. People who live in this environment, they're automatically going to be exposed to the cold because their environment is cold. So to say that cold exposure isn't natural is completely wrong, especially, in cold environments. That is when it's the most natural. So again, if you live in a natural environment and you live in a natural way and it's cold, then it's more natural to be exposed to that environment than to be inside. And yes, you can wear clothes. Sure, that's how we've adapted to colder environments, but you still have to be exposed to that environment. You still have to be outside. So there's some degree of being cold involved there. However, if you live in Amazonia, in the state of Amazonia in Brazil, it never gets cold there, and you have no cold sources in that sense. So, well, let's say you find a way to do ice baths. Am I
Mm,
completely opposed to that? I'm not sure. However, is it a part of your environment? Not really. Now, why am
mm,
I not opposed to the ice bath or cold exposure in an artificial sense? Because life in the human body, the way we create energy is we have the electron transport chain, which is an electrical wire that's powering this big rotating hydrogen gun. When you do cold exposure, you bring these guys together, you bring them closer, and for each angstrom they come closer, they become 10 times more efficient. And so, from what I understand, you bring them closer, they come closer together because when the mitochondria need to create more heat, of course, they'll heat up the water, and so the water will shrink. And this shrinking will shrink the respiratory chain, this electric
mm,
wire. It will come closer together, and so it becomes way, way, way more efficient. And because of that, it's we're talking about a completely different thing now. Because before I thought it was a stress, now I understand that no, if you're becoming way, way more efficient, there's something else here. And I'll tell you something interesting. I began doing cold exposure again the last Swedish summer. So that began in June? Yeah, so I began in June and I did it throughout. I've done it, I mean, from June until now. But I
mm,
did it in the summer. So I used to sunbathe, get sweaty, then I'd fill the bathtub with the coldest water, jump in there for like 6 to 10 minutes, then I'd go sunbathe again. And what I noticed is when I went into it, yes, there was this, you have to catch your breath a little bit. You get this cold shock. Um, and that gets better over time, of course, each time you do it. But afterward, I noticed that my pulse went down. And I also noticed that I was a bit calmer and I wasn't stressed. My pulse went down and I wasn't stressed. I was calmer in general. And my breathing was slower as well. That's what I was trying to add. So, what does that mean? that's the opposite of stress, isn't it? So okay, there was the adaptation itself was stressful, but then and it was very short by the way in comparison to the rest of the session, but then when I was in there, the breathing got slower and the pulse went down. What does that mean? Higher energy efficiency. I
Hmm.
wasn't losing energy. I was becoming more energy efficient.
Hmm.
So is it really a stress in the sense of, doing a 100-meter sprint or a sleep deprivation or losing blood? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's a stress. I think what you're doing is you're supercharging your mitochondria. That's what you're doing. But then again, are you increasing energy demands? Yes, yes, you need to create more heat. However, if you're white, let's say, as long as you're not an equatorial African, do you have the ability to create heat far better because you can uncouple? Um,
Hmm.
yes. So is it a stress in the same sense? No. And also, cold depletes deuterium. I asked Dr. Laszlo Boros, a deuterium expert, and he said that I asked him first about, or no, let's just get to the cold part. I asked him, how does cold exposure relate to deuterium? And he said, cold exposure is one of the fastest ways of depleting deuterium. That's what he said. And I
Hmm.
was I was quite surprised actually. And
Hmm.
so with all those things in mind, the benefits outweigh the negatives. However, there is a disclaimer. If you're unhealthy and you shiver a lot, and the idea of being cold is, very unpleasant, just the thought of it is very unpleasant, then you need heat. Then Alginus is very correct. The people that say that it's a stress, they're correct. Because if your machinery is broken, how the hell are you going to do all these things that I just said? You need a healthy mitochondria to do all of these things.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. If you're completely broken, of course you shouldn't do cold exposure. Of course you won't be able to walk shirtless for, 30 minutes outside at 0 degrees Celsius, like I just did in the morning. You won't be able to do those things. Healthy people will be able to be cold without feeling these things because they can go through that process and become so energy efficient and create enough heat that they won't be losing energy, they won't be creating any damage. Unhealthy people will not be able to do that, and that's why
Hmm.
you'll notice that the unhealthy people are the ones who wear the most clothes during winter, while the healthiest people are the most cold tolerant. So you look at isolated and primitive tribes, you look at the isolated Swiss, that Weston A. Price visited. Uh, the children there were running around with not too much clothing, not winter clothing, um, barefoot, splashing. Um, there was this stream that he was, talking about, and they were splashing, playing in the stream with their feet in the water, very cold water, and he was wearing his coat. Like this was probably between 0 degrees Celsius and 10 degrees Celsius, if I had to guess. Again,
Hmm.
in the Swiss mountains, it's pretty cold over there. And did they have any problems? No. Look at children. Children haven't degraded as much because they've been on Earth less. Look at them in Sweden. Like I can go on a walk. I remember in November when it snowed the first time this year. I was walking around and I had a jacket and everything on. This kid was in his t-shirt. I saw him, running around smiling because we have a school nearby. I used to go to that school when I was younger.
Hmm.
He was running around smiling in a t-shirt. No cap, nothing, nothing, no gloves, nothing. Was he cold? No, he wasn't. Healthy people aren't cold in cold environments. And if they don't feel cold, there's no stress involved.
Hmm.
So yes, that's my take on cold exposure.
Hmm. What's your opinion on Cruz's idea that as equatorial humans moved away towards upper latitudes, away, less sun exposure, they embraced the cold and started creating UV light inside of their cells as opposed
I
to receiving outwardly?
I
Yeah.
forgot about that. That's also a part of it that I should have added. Yes. So I'll give you an example. I have clients who are in Europe, and some of them have mental health issues. They're depressed. In the summer, of course, if they come to me during the summer, I tell them go out into the sun and see the sunrise and everything. Why? Because that creates dopamine. If you're depressed, you automatically have low dopamine levels. Any mental health issue, low dopamine. Always the case. Unless the dopamine isn't utilized somehow, but I am not sure that that can be the case, but maybe it is. So I tell them, go out into the sun. And they, of course, they start becoming happier. However,
Mm,
sometimes they come to me during the winter, or in some cases, they say, okay, but in the winter there's no sun. What am I supposed to do? And then I say, I will do cold exposure. Now, what does that do? It decreases dopamine. It does the same thing. Same thing with melanin. You get melanin from UV. You also because when you do cold exposure, again as you say, the mitochondria start emitting ultra weak biophotons, so it emits UV light basically. The mitochondria becomes like a little sun.
mm,
Those photons will catalyze the same reactions that are catalyzed by the UV light that comes from the sun. Okay?
mm,
And so all these things that we get from the aromatic amino acids, so the amino acids, so the little tiny parts of proteins that have
mm,
a ring that can catch light, all of those, I believe it's tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine. I believe it's tyrosine, or no, maybe either tryptophan or tyrosine. One of those turns into dopamine, another one turns into serotonin, and they all do this through UV light. And so what happens if you so of course people get depressed during the winter if they don't do cold exposure. So you're
mm,
completely correct. And another thing is you need melanin in the brain. And the reason I don't know if you want me to go into the reason, but you need melanin in the brain for it to work optimally. And of course, if you're very if you're in a northern environment and you don't get a lot of sun, you won't get that melanin because what we do is we suck in the melanin as well. We need the melanin inside,
yeah.
and we get more melanin through UV, either through cold exposure or through sunlight. And if you don't do cold exposure, you'll have a melanin deficiency in your brain, and your brain won't work. So
Mm,
you do repeated cold exposure, and you'll notice that your brain is working better because you have more melanin in your brain. Like if I compare myself, not because now I'm doing way more cold. Like I did no cold exposure last winter. Now I'm doing a lot of cold exposure, and now I feel a lot better. Like cognitively speaking, I'm also doing a bunch of other things, but yeah,
mm,
just
mm,
an example. So this melanin story, doing cold exposure to get melanin and to get all these things that UV light gives us,
mm,
absolutely crucial. And it is the way we've adapted to colder environments. It's
mm,
really a miracle of nature that it works that it works out so well, that we're able to get the right type of light just through cold exposure. But yes, that is the case.
mm. So you wouldn't recommend someone like in the Middle East, full of sun, equatorial region, doing cold exposure because I mean you can overdo it obviously, right? You don't want to overrun the engine of the mitochondria.
I mean, with Middle Easterners, especially people living in the desert gets cold, doesn't it? And we're
Mm,
also we're also not like look, it depends on your skin. So um if you're very close to the equator, if you're an equatorial African,
mm,
as Jack says, you're genetically speaking not made for the cold. You're made for sunlight. You don't need it, and you don't do well in the cold because you don't have the same abilities as a lighter skinned person. We have other abilities, they have other abilities because of their environments. We're all adapted to a certain environment.
mm,
um, with a Middle Easterner, there's sort of it depends. Like you and me, we're more light skinned. There are Middle Easterners that are more dark skinned, like let's say
mm,
people in Morocco. And then there are Middle Easterners, or Morocco isn't the Middle East, but let's say the Arab world. Let's just take the Arab world. You've got Moroccans, and there's somewhere in between. They
mm,
could do a little bit of it gets cold in the mountains. They can do a little bit of that, but they don't have the same abilities as us. And then you've got the Sudanese people, and they're made for way more sunlight and way less cold because they have no cold in their environment. So it really As long as you're in your the environment you're supposed to be in, genetically speaking, and you're healthy, then you don't really need to think about cold exposure that much. You just have to be outside as much as you can, and you have to abide by nature's laws.
Mm.
However, let's say you're very light skinned and you move down somewhere because you're sick. Can you do cold exposure then? Yes, it's probably a good idea. It's probably a
Mm.
good idea. And then also, I mean, these are hard things. You'd have to ask Cruz about this. But let's
Yeah.
say you're dark skinned and you don't have the ability to create as much heat because your mitochondria are way more efficient. And then let's say you live in Sweden now and you can't move. It will be, let's say, 2 3 years before you can move. Do you do a bunch of cold exposure to create internal UV? Will you even be able to do that? Do you emit as many biophotons for that to be the case? Like
Mm.
these are the questions I'd be interested in hearing from him.
Definitely.
Um, but in any case, yeah, that's
Okay.
sort of my answer, I guess. Hope that
Okay.
answered your question.
Great. No, great answer. Um, so how does we were talking about magnetism before we started recording, and you talked about the Yucatan Peninsula and it probably being the best place to receive that part of the chair, the three-legged stool, which is
Yes.
magnetism. How do we explain that in an evolutionary sense? I mean, we've all lived on the surface. We aren't creatures that go underground, right? We kind of live on the surface of the earth. So the magnetism, from what I understand, that we get from the earth, Earth's core, is relatively the same. Why is it that going somewhere like the Yucatan Peninsula healthier for a human being, right? Isn't that not aligned necessarily with our evolutionary past? Or
No, actually, during the Roman Empire, the Earth's magnetic field was 5 times stronger,
hmm,
something like that. So it's
hmm,
supposed to be strong. I believe it was 2.5 milligauss. Now it's 0.5 milligauss. Like over here in Sweden, where it's supposed to be, because the closer you get to the poles, the stronger the magnetic field is supposed to be.
hmm,
We're at zero point 0.6 milligauss. That's nothing.
hmm,
Okay, so it's supposed to be high. And again, according to Dr. Dean Bonley and his work, you can see that the more you increase magnetism, as long as it's um, in line with the Earth's magnetic field, the healthier people get, the faster they heal. So the thing with Yucatan is you have the Chicxulub crater there. You have a what was it? An asteroid
one
that
that killed
hit.
the dinosaur, apparently, one of them.
Yes. So it hit there, and because of that, the Earth's crust is closer to the surface, and the magnetic field there is far stronger. It's the same thing with volcanoes. Because of all the, I guess, metal, the magnetic field there is stronger, and that's why Jack Cruz lives in the middle of a volcanic crater. And it really does check out.
Hmm,
You know, high magnetism, healthier. So pick a place where the magnetism is higher. And no, I mean Earth's evolutionary or human evolutionary history. I mean, was I there? No, I was born in 2002. I have no idea, brother. But what I do know is that in terms of how magnetism affects humans, I know that it affects us positively. And I know that the magnetic field varies wherever you are in the world. And I know that when people go to places where the magnetic field is stronger, they feel better.
hmm.
That's what I know.
Okay. Okay. And the main mechanism is affects water, the structure of water, so on and so
Yes, it
forth.
creates easy, according to Dr. Gerald Polk. I actually asked him about this because I was
Mm,
interested. It increases easy water, and if someone's interested in easy water, they can check out the interview I did with Dr. Gerald Pollock. I believe he's pretty good at explaining those things. But basically, it's water that's uh, charge separated, and so it has more energy. It's water that holds more energy, more negative charge, and that powers the cell. Um, that's one thing, and then again, you have the electrons and the protons that are moving more easily, really, and that's how we create energy.
what's your opinion on Cruz's radically different view on evolution that we lost our hair and separated from um, that kingdom of apes, those primates, because we lost our hair and managed to absorb more sunlight. You're familiar with this whole thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sort of.
And the whole when our old mammalian ancestors who were little rodents in the ground, when that great extinction event happened, went underground and created UV light from the inside. I mean, it's a really radical, but you know, it's an explanation behind how photosynthesis was blocked, and scientists um, say it was maybe like, I don't know, 100 years, maybe it was less. I don't know. I don't know the exact number they put behind it, but to disrupt the food chain for that long, and then him explaining how creatures that could fly could go to different food sources, but for those mammalian kind of rodent-like creatures, our great ancestors, how did they receive food with that disruption? They went underground. Could we be like, you're familiar with all that, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah? What do you think about that? Is it just like crazy radical theory? You don't have any opinion on it?
Honestly, I've heard him talking about it a lot, but the reason I've heard him talking about it is because I click on his videos to understand um, more about health.
Yes.
And in terms of evolutionary biology, it doesn't. There is one core principle that I explained earlier, and that's all you need to know in terms of the overwhelming majority of human existence. You don't need to look past that for you
Mm,
to improve any part of your life right now, and that's the only thing I'm interested in, really. So that's why I have, well, not so many thoughts about it. I know that what it helped me with, the only thing it helped me with, um, is understanding ACTH and clip. That's all. So palm C, we have a gene called palm C, and if you shine blue light on us, we create clip and ACTH, and those raise cortisol and insulin. And if you shine UV light on us, we create alpha MSH, beta MSH, gamma MSH, and beta endorphin, and then a few other things, I believe. One other thing, I think there's seven. Yeah, so it should be bam, bam, bam. Yeah, and another one. But I don't remember what the fifth one is for UV. Uh, and then we produce melanin and beta endorphins and everything. And so with the Palm C, these rodents got blue light because again everything was blocked, so they weren't getting any red or blue light. Or UV, they were getting a bunch of blue light, and so they were creating their own blood sugar. The problem is, from what I understand, I mean, what he's saying is that the light itself is the blue light itself is the energy that's creating sort of the glucose. What I thought was the case was that you got this input, and then that told your body to release sugar from the liver that's been stored from food. So
mm,
then, what doesn't make sense to me is where the hell are they getting the Like, w- is the light itself giving the energy for glucose creation? And I guess what he's saying is that light is becoming energy. Or,
mm,
sorry, light is becoming mass. And that process is actually happening. I thought it
mm,
was just a signal, but it turns out he really means that, E equals mc squared?
mm.
That's what he's sort of trying to explain. That the
Yep.
E from the light is turning into mass, and the mass is glucose, and that's how they survived. That's sort of the interesting thing about this entire story for me. Other than that, I don't have too many thoughts about it. You know what happened to those furry mammals afterward? I have no idea.
Who knows? It's all just, I mean, speculation, obviously. It was just like so long ago, but I don't know. I think it's an interesting story that he puts forth. It's just so radical, so different than, the kind of the usual story. Um, okay. So tell me a little bit. I read one of your posts. You were making connections between Adonis, that's his name. He has that long Greek name,
Yes,
Adonis.
Hogen's Wonder Planets.
Yes, and his work with maybe some of Cruz's works or some quantum biology ideas. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you tell me a little bit about some of those connections and yeah.
Absolutely. So it was mainly about, well, there are several things actually. First of all, Allogenus's diet was extremely deuterium depleted.
Mm.
That's the first thing. And he wasn't talking about deuterium, but it was super deuterium depleted. He was very, very, like, people think it's about raw meat. No, Allogenus was about raw fat. He was about
Mm.
fat. That was the primary thing. He said that the most healing thing was fat, and if you're eating meat without fat, you won't go anywhere. And that's been my personal experience. That's been the experience of others as well. And it's the biggest mistake I see in terms of nutrition. That's one thing. Um, and then another thing was he was, again, against water consumption. And what happens if you get your water from food is that water is charged. It's easy water. And according to Gerald Pollack's work, if you consume easy water, you create easy water in yourself. So he was also creating easy through the diet, which is really
Mm.
interesting. And another thing is, and Cruz actually, you may have, if you've seen the interview he did with Robert Breedlove, he says that he's for raw meat. He sees raw meat as superior to cooked meat. Now, I was afraid to mention this to him, and like especially in the first 30 minutes. If you watch the first 30 minutes of the interview I did with him, you know why I didn't delve into that. With the second one, I wanted to sort of focus more on his work out of respect for him, out of respect for the fact that he was doing another podcast interview with me, which is, you know, I'm very grateful for that. But he was saying that the way I think it's Whole Foods checks if something is organic or not is through photomultipliers. So they look at how much light the food is emitting, and what they've seen is that organic food emits way more light than non organic food. And so they check, so they see if to understand if this farmer is fraudulent or not. They look at the food through a photomultiplier and they see how many biophotons it's emitting. And so
Mm.
that's a measurement of how much you could say, if you go to ancient times, how much life force there is in the food, how much energy there is in the food in general. What happens is when you cook food, is the light emittance, the biophoton emittance, you kill it. You say bye bye to it. When you
Mm.
freeze food, you do the same thing. You keep it in the fridge for prolonged periods of time, you do the same thing. However, if it ferments, the bacteria themselves emit way more light, so it's a different story with fermented food. When you cook food, you also destroy the easy water. So when you consume it, you no longer get the easy water. Now, if you leave it raw in the middle, yeah, you sort of keep the integrity of the cells there as long as you didn't heat it up too much. But the more you heat it up, the more you lose the easy water. And you lose the water in general. What happens when you cook a steak? Loses the water. So you
Mm.
lose the light. You lose the light energy from the food. You lose the water, the charged water, that's very beneficial according to Gerald Pollack's work, and organisms emit a biomagnetic field. And of course, this is speculation. The other two, not speculation, but this is speculation, because if we link it to light water magnetism, there is a biomagnetic field that's emitted by these animals and plants. And when you consume them, and this is something that comes from Varys Samad as well, I guess you're familiar with him by now, um, dear friend of mine. He says that when you harvest plants, for example, and you make juice out of them straight away, that's how the raw what the very successful I'm not sure, I haven't looked into this, but he says that the very successful raw vegans, like Lou Corona, for example, that's the only thing they advocate for if you're going to use these plants, that you harvest them and then you consume them directly, or you make the thing that you're going to make out of them directly. That's not
Mm.
cooking, of course, because then they have the biomagnetic field intact. They haven't lost that energy. I guess it's the same with cooking. I believe that cooking will destroy it, freezing will destroy this field, and that's going to be beneficial. And if you want to, I guess, if you want to make it practical, mitochondria emit a magnetic field. If you slaughter a goat and you don't cook the meat and you eat the meat, you're going to have this, I'm guessing that the mitochondria won't die immediately. So I guess the magnetic field is sort of generated by the mitochondria. And I guess when you consume that, energy doesn't really go to waste. So I think we can get, maybe we can get magnetism through food. Maybe.
Hmm.
Again, I'm not sure how that works, but I just wanted to share that because I think it's interesting. But those are the main things. Those are additional arguments for why raw meat is superior to cooked meat that are
Mm,
very, very strong when you add them to everything else. You know what I
mm,
usually say? I haven't mentioned any of that, and you've seen how long I've answered this question. So yeah, that's I guess that's it.
mm. Um, okay, and so it's just fermentation is the only way to preserve those kinds of things that you're talking about.
Yes,
Not from
because Jack Cruz says, according to him, and I usually, whenever I've looked up anything he says, it's correct. Yesterday, I looked up just on a tangent. I looked up whether there's blood sorry, whether there's DHA in blood, and then I found a study saying how important it is for the blood to have high DHA levels for brain health. So of
Mm,
course, blood contains DHA. With bacteria, he says that they emit 5,000 times more light than eukaryotes. And what is meat? Let's say you're fermenting meat, or you're fermenting. No, yeah. Let's say you're fermenting meat. What
yeah.
is the meat made of? It's made of eukaryotes. It's made of animal cells and a little bit of bacteria. What you're doing is you're turning a bunch of eukaryotes, um, or you're using eukaryotes to produce a bunch of prokaryotes because the bacteria that are on there are going to start eating the animal cells and they're going to proliferate. So in
Mm,
total, you're going to have very high light emittance at the end. So
okay.
yes, maybe the animal cells are degrading in terms of how many biophotons they're emitting, but the
Mm,
bacteria are increasing, so you're offsetting that by a lot because the increase in light is going to be exponential because of how many bacteria are going to be growing inside of the high meat.
wow. Wow.
So that's why fermentation is able to preserve those qualities because of the bacteria and because of their light properties. That's
Mm,
at least if you want to link it to light, that's the way I would explain it.
very interesting. Have you linked any of this stuff to gut health and this kind of stuff, or is that not really your point of interest? Yeah,
Absolutely.
awesome.
You see, what really fascinated me with the first interview is the story about Jacob. I don't know. You might have listened to the first interview I did with
Mhm.
Jack. You might remember the story about Jacob, where this guy with mental health issues and a completely messed up gut, brain gut axis issues, insane gut brain axis issues. Cruz told him to come to El Salvador and to live with his members. Now, I'm pretty sure his members probably gave him some high quality food as well, but usually food won't get you well in 2 months. This guy got well in 2 months. He went from suicidal to being, you know, very healthy. What did he do? Cruz told him how to, build up his sun tolerance. He told him to sunbathe in the morning and in the evening. And then he told him to go into the UV, and then he was able to tolerate the UV, and so he was able to get a lot of UV, get his vitamin D levels up, get his melanin levels up, and he told him to sunbathe clavicle to hip bone, sunbathing his digestive tract, getting a lot of infrared light in there. And what did that do? Gave his digestive tract a lot of energy to rebuild the gut lining, and voila, leaky gut was gone. His problems were gone. Gut brain axis problems were gone. In terms of nutrition, I always say that you can approach the problem through nutrition, but it might take you, uh, you know, 1 or 2 years to get, feel really healthy. It might take 3 to 4 years. It really depends on what kind of problems you have. This guy had leaky gut in 2 months, brother, with
Mm,
just, high UV. How did he do that? This is one of the biggest takeaways I've gotten from Jack. And I don't think he's put it into. Yes, he has put it into words, but it passes you by in like 10 seconds out of a 2 hour interview, and it's really important. Sam, if you're trying to rebuild the gut using food, you're trying to use damaged machinery to repair the machinery. You understand what I mean? So you're using nutrition. You're eating this food, and that food is passing through your digestive tract that's already broken, and you're getting the nutrients that way to heal your digestive tract.
Mm,
With light, I mean, many of the wavelengths penetrate quite deeply, especially the red light. You're not reliant on the machinery anymore. And with UV, it doesn't penetrate, but it gives you a lot of energy. It's you split water and you get hydrogen, you get oxygen, you get electrons. So it's practically the same thing, and that goes, that's
mm,
applies to the rest of the body as well, even
mm,
though it's a surface process. Um, you don't rely on the machinery when you use UV and infrared and red and light in general. When you use sunlight, I should say, I should make it simple. You don't rely on the machinery when you use sunlight, which means that you don't have a bottleneck anymore, which means that you'll heal way faster. That's why sunlight is extremely important for people with gut issues. Because if you only rely on nutrition, you're bottlenecked by your condition. Because nutrition works through your digestive tract, and that is the thing that's damaged. So that's why, yes, that's why sunlight is
wow.
extremely important for these kinds of things.
Wow. Wow, that's very interesting. And yeah, it makes me think of how all those different parts. I mean, so you're talking about needing sunlight to hit directly on the stomach region. It's not
Yes.
just about, okay, so it
Ev-
matters. Yeah, go ahead.
yes, yes. So the entire body, well, ideally, you get it on the entire body and the digestive tract.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
the healthiest.
And yeah, obviously the sexual organs as well. I mean, the only person I know of that has talked about this is Paul Saladino, like sun in your balls and stuff. But
And now Cruz has talked about it as well.
has he really? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, one of the things is UV produces nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is very important for blood flow. So if someone has ED, they can't get it up, then obviously you should sun your your
oh,
private part,
yeah.
your shaft, I should say.
Yes.
Uh, it's the same thing with the testicles. I
Yeah.
mean, they if you give them energy through sunlight, of course, whatever processes they have to go through to produce testosterone or sperm, whatever it might be, that's
Mm,
going to be supported, and so you can produce more. That's always going to be the case.
yeah.
But the nitric oxide link to the shaft is extra important if someone has ED. That's what I would
Mm,
say.
okay. What's your opinion on non-native electromagnetic frequencies? How is that? Has it changed since diving into this, or did you already know about the negative effects of these
I've
kinds of things?
always known that they're bad.
Yeah.
However, however, I didn't know that RF was as horrible as it really is because it opens up the blood-brain barrier. That's one. So let's say someone in your house uses perfume and you like using your phone a lot. Now, when you breathe that in, instead of that not going to the brain, it's far more likely to go to the brain. You get
Wow.
exposed. You eat fish that has mercury in it, and you use RF. Way more. The mercury is way more likely to go into the brain if you use your phone a lot. It's the same with the digestive tract. It just like it opens up the blood-brain barrier. It creates leaky gut. It opens up the gut junctions as well through the
Mm,
same process. So
mm,
you really need to avoid, sitting on the couch and having your phone. People do this. They bend their neck and then they have their phone right at the stomach,
yes.
or they have their laptop right at on their hips, and of course it's emitting a bunch of RF into the stomach. That's a really bad idea. I
Mm,
also learned that because many people say EMF, non-native EMFs. I use the term, but I use it way less than people usually do in this space, and that's because I split it into magnetic field. Like when it's a magnetic field, I say magnetic field, electric field, RF, RF. So this is
Mm,
mainly RF. One thing I learned from Cruz about electric fields, because he was talking about Roberto Becker's work, is that electric fields will give you osteoporosis because the bones are they're conductive. They're very very conductive, and their
mhm,
health relies on electricity. And if you remove the electricity in the body, you completely mess that up. And when you have an electric field, you're sort of stealing energy from that entire system. So then you're going to get osteoporosis. So when my mother uses her phone with the charger, into the wall, because it's not grounded, it's only to it goes in directly without having the grounding thingy. That emits an insanely strong electric field. Like if you're holding the cable
mm,
and you have it into the wall, it's right at the cable. It's like 1,000 volt per meters. It's really high, and that's of course going to give you osteoporosis. So I tell her, if you're going to plug it in, you go far away from it, and you don't put it near me. You don't put it on the table if I'm sitting at the table. Um,
mm,
Magnetic fields just give you cancer. That's one thing. But then the biggest thing actually, because RF, I didn't think about it like this, but RF is just light. Like the way it's emitted is just like light, but you can't see it. So it's the
mm,
same with blue light, but blue light, RF penetrates more because it's a way longer wavelength. Blue light is the same thing, artificial blue light, but worse. It's the worst one because it affects you the most. It has the most energy to affect you. Like the shorter the wavelength, the more it carries
yeah,
energy. And with blue light, I mean, your entire circadian system is controlled through blue light. And you've got photoreceptors not only in your eyes, also on your skin. So
mm,
one thing, I'll just give this as a tip. Artificial people think that artificial lights should be avoided at night when the sun sets. No, 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 no. No, no. If I go into the supermarket at 8 a.m., I wear blue blockers.
mm,
I wear blue blockers. I don't want that light because it's not the sun. Okay, I'll be exposed to the sun when I'm carrying my groceries. Of course, I take off my glasses immediately when I go outside. It's
mm,
super unhealthy to wear those outside. I take off my glasses. I'm carrying my groceries, and I'm going to the car, and the sky is above me. I want that light. I don't want the artificial light because
mm,
no matter what kind of artificial light it is at any time, it's going to be the wrong. Like it's not going to be. It's not going to match the sun. Okay,
mm,
it's not going to match what the environment is telling you. Uh, it's not going to match that signal, and whatever makeup the sun spectrum has at that time, that gives you, you know, a snapshot of the exact time that it should be in your body. So one is synced to the other. So the light can never be adequate. Um, so blue light, again, as Jack says, is the most important thing. And then another thing, I can't 100% remember how this works. No, I think I can actually. So with the photoelectric effect, and this is going to be really, really interesting, especially if someone cares about attractiveness. Yeah, if a young person is looking at
yeah,
this and they're a looksmaxer. So blue light, according to Jack Cruz, penetrates 3 to 6 centimeters into the body. And of course, what people do is they have their phone pretty close to their face and, the computer and everything. And what did we grow up doing, or me at least, my generation? Playing video games. And I didn't have a filter on the screen. That came way later, when I was 17. But at that point, I was playing a lot of video games. And so, based on the photoelectric effect, you get light and that can turn into electricity. It moves electrons, basically. And what we know about Robert Becker's work is that if you mess up whatever's happened, the electric properties of the bones, they degenerate. So, Sam, what happens if you have a screen that's emitting blue light on the face? You're going to degenerate your mandible, your ramus, your zygomatic bones, your orbital bones. and,
mm,
and what do those do? They give you uh, attractiveness. They make you attractive. And if you do that over and over and over again when you're younger, your face won't develop correctly because you'll mess up your skull. Um, Yeah,
Wow.
so that's another thing. Blue light messes up your bones. It messes up your development as well. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there in terms of EMF.
Wow. That's terrifying. The just imagining like degeneration of the bones of a kid just with their faces right up against. Yeah, and so it's not just this because I don't know. I the research I've seen shows that this poor posture is usually, or sorry, this malformation of the structure of the face is usually from like, things like mouth breathing and so on and so forth. So it's more than
I'll tell you. It's not just blue light, of course.
yeah.
If you don't get enough vitamin K2, you look the same way as the kid with the blue light in his face, even
Mm,
without blue light. You go to
mm,
Weston A. Price's book; they had no blue light back then, or maybe they did to some degree, but it wasn't as bad as what we have now. And they were also malformed because they weren't getting enough fat soluble nutrients. When I speak about a negative health effect, I never mean that it's the only cause. I should clarify that, of course. With a bad facial structure, you've got the fat soluble vitamins you need to worry about. You've got the light, and again, UV gives you vitamin D. You can't move calcium to the skull if you don't have enough vitamin D. So that's
mm,
another thing. You avoid UV, you don't develop correctly as well because you'll be vitamin D deficient. Um, you've got tongue posture and correct breathing and everything. You need that as well. Otherwise, you won't be able to hold up your maxilla. Your maxilla will sink into your face, block your airways, and
mm,
you won't look good. All attractive people have maxillas that are, up and forward grown, and that comes from correct breathing and the correct tongue posture, which is natural. It's the natural position of the tongue. It just gets messed up when you have modern factors in the environment. So yeah,
okay.
just wanted to put that out there.
And the chewing as well.
Yeah, of course, you need strong masseter muscles, and that comes from eating a natural diet. Of course,
Mm,
we can't think of many tribes that didn't consume any meat. Um, you know, in any part of the world, really, they've all used their masseter muscles quite a lot, and those who didn't, they had worse looking faces. Um,
mm,
and the masseter muscles also hold up the maxilla. That's one of the muscles that holds up the maxilla. Again, with the for you to stand, this is a good way to think about it. For you to stand up straight, to keep the bones in a certain position, your leg muscles have to be strong enough to support that. Now we don't think about the face in the same way because we're mostly unconscious of how these muscles are affecting the bones in our face, but it's the exact same way that with the maxilla and the masseters. You need strong enough masseters to keep the maxilla in the correct position. Otherwise, just like if you have weak leg muscles that can't hold up the legs, if you have weak masseters, your maxilla will sink down. Again, just a tangent, but thought I'd put it out there.
mm. Okay. Um, so what does your diet look like? Has it changed at all since April? Everything you told me about this raw primal diet. Are you including more things like seafood, and this kind of stuff, more DHA or yep.
Costs so much over here to get the correct salmon. We have
Mm,
salmon. We have two big fat lakes in Sweden. They're the two biggest lakes. They're called Vättern and Vänern. We have salmon in Vänern, but it's like $60 per kilo.
mm,
So it's actually 65 dollars per kilo. Not that it's a big difference, but still, it's really expensive. So I bought like 100 grams once, and I ate that. I'm sure that's fine. But the way I offset the fact that I don't eat a lot of seafood is through, first of all, liver and through a lot of beef fat. What has happened, and this is only specific to me really, is that, let's see here. I've stopped consuming raw milk because my raw milk source is bad. It's A1 Holstein cows and Swedish red and brown cows. They're both A1. Holsteins are horrible. Again, A1, and they're not good in general. It's a bad breed. You want A2 cows, you want Guernsey, you want Jersey, etc. Goats are good, sheep are good.
mm,
Um, I don't have that. And they also they grow grains on the property, this farm that I've gone to for 3 years. Used to go to actually. Now, of course, I'm not drinking. milk, so of course I'm not going. They grow grains that they spray on the property and they give that to the cows, which means that I'm drinking pesticides. And I don't want that. Now, the good thing is that bacteria can turn some pesticides into organic materials that are non-toxic, just like certain bacteria and fungi can turn glyphosate into energy sources, etc. Bacteria, when you ferment stuff, it reduces the pesticides. I got that information from a kind viewer who's also in Sweden, so thank you to him. I think his name is Benny Regis on in the YouTube comments. I just wanted to shout him out. Thank you for that. So I've been offsetting it through fermentation. But what I noticed, Sam, was that when I removed dairy for a while because I brought in spring water from a natural spring in a nature reserve, I started drinking water instead of milk. I noticed that my pulse went down,
Mm.
my heart rate went down. And that felt good because I had had high heart rate. And the way I was controlling it, one, celery juice was helping, but I stopped that in March 2024. April was the last time, I believe, I drank it. And switching to chicken instead of beef helped as well. But the main
Mm.
cause, it seems, was the milk. Because of the pesticides, because of the A1 milk. A1 milk is very problematic. You offset the A1 milk, by the way, through
Mm.
fermentation as well. So I was saving myself in two ways by fermenting it, not just one. But no, it wasn't worth it. However, I will say that even though it was not organic because it was sprayed, and the cow breed was bad, and it was, cow's milk, goat's milk is usually better for humans, just looking at people's experiences. I was able to make a lot of progress in my digestive issues by drinking it for 3 years. I healed my, indigestion using it, and a lot of the leaky gut got better, skin got many things improved, energy levels. I had low energy if I didn't drink it. So even this bad quality raw fermented milk was able to help me a lot. But when I used it as a medicine, when I was done with it, when I had taken my, um, you know, rounds of medicine, you could say, and I had healed all these issues, continuing to drink it came with a net negative effect instead of a net positive effect. And that's because you constantly change. The body constantly changes. The environmental factors constantly change. One food might be appropriate at one point, but then it's not appropriate anymore. And since it's not the quality that I'm looking for, I'm not consuming dairy. So what I am consuming is raw chicken, veal liver, raw chicken liver. Consumed that yesterday.
Mm.
Fermented vegetables, especially the juice, sometimes just as a bacteria source because the raw fermented milk was my bacteria source. And again, I can handle fermented vegetables without getting any problems because, again, digestive tract is pretty good. And I'm consuming a bunch of raw beef fat. That's what
Mm.
I'm consuming. That's my
Okay.
diet. It's very simple. And of course, everything is local. If my mother tells me, why don't you eat an orange? I tell her, where is the orange from? She says, I don't know. I tell her, Spain. Where am I, mother? She says, oh, okay. Because I've told her
Yeah.
I've told her about the locality of stuff several times. And so I'm usually, um, on my parents' what I don't want to say asses, but you know what I mean. I'm on their case, I should say.
Yeah.
When they buy avocados from Peru, I tell them at least buy them from Spain. That's at least a
Mm.
bit closer.
Mm.
But yeah, that those are the main things I've changed, and I'm very strict about those. Oh, but in I mean, the diet, as long as you're eating a whole foods nutrient dense diet, it doesn't that's local and everything's high quality. There's nothing to worry about. The specific makeup is just related to your, you know, local environment. There's no secret there. The secret is on how you handle how much you're exposed to the outside environment, how synced you are to your environment. The
Mm. Mm.
circannual cycle and the circadian cycle.
Okay.
Those are the important parts, really. Because
Okay.
without them, you won't utilize the food as well. You need good machinery to utilize the food. If the machinery is broken, it doesn't matter what you eat.
Mm. 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 Okay. Um, Do you have big or do you have opinions on ketosis and being on strict ketosis, then going off of it, or kind of having this mixed I mean, some carnivores, say that, oh, you're not in ketosis all the time, gluconeogenesis, so on and so forth. So what's your opinion on someone who's just on keto
Super
all the
easy. Super easy based on locality.
time?
So there's this episode that Lex Friedman did with Jordan Jones. Jordan Jones is a survivalist. So he's talking about him being on the show. I can't remember what it's called. And he's in northern Canada. Really, really cold. And he's talking about how he's making all these snares and he's eating rabbits, but he's losing a bunch of body weight, right? Because rabbit, again, it's called rabbit starvation, not getting enough fat, dying from not getting enough fat, or not necessarily dying, but getting health complications, because rabbits don't contain significant amounts of fat. And then in the show, he manages to kill, I believe it's an elk, and he gets all this fat, and now he's really happy, and his weight isn't going down. He's not becoming thinner because of all the protein. So he has the fat now, and he's really happy. And his diet is basically elk meat and elk fat.
Mm,
Why am I telling you this? What does this have to do with ketosis? Well, notice how this guy is trying to survive here. And the only food he has available is this elk. Now, is there any ketosis or, nutritional considerations here? No, no, not at all. It's the same thing for the Inuit. It's the same thing for the Nenets in northern Russia. It's the same thing for the people in Siberia. If nothing, that's the food they have available. There's no ketosis. There's nothing like that. That's just the food that they have in their environment, and then whatever the body does with it is whatever the body does with it. Now, in terms of modern humans, what you have to do is you have to try to mimic that principle. So, when apples grow in Sweden, I'm looking at it right now, by the way, there are no apples there, which means I shouldn't be eating apples because apples aren't growing here. Now, when the apples grow, I will eat apples.
mm,
No problems because it's local. It's growing in my environment, and so the signal that I'm getting from the sun and from every single factor in the environment is in line the um, with the information and the aspects of the environment that are allowing the tree to even grow those apples. They're in sync, and so I can eat the apple. That's how I think about ketosis. I don't think about it. I look at what I have available. And if it's
mm,
available in my local environment, then I can consume it. Now, do I do certain things with the apple? Yes, I do peel it because I know that there are anti nutrients in the peel
mm.
of the apple, or the skin, I should say. Do I abuse the apples? No, I eat one apple a day, usually. But that's based on my body and what I've found works best for me. But again, the most important part isn't, ketosis or well, eating a bunch of carbs. It's look at your environment, look at how much sun you're getting, and
Mm.
l- and when you're eating, eat outside, and make sure that your food is local. Again,
Yes.
that's it.
Okay.
There's
What
no
about
there's
working out? Working out indoors.
working out indoors.
Yeah. Oh,
Being
yeah.
indoors, what anyone who's watching this should grasp, or I should say, not anyone, but the viewer, because there's only one person watching this. It's me, you, and the viewer. Um, should grasp from this is that being indoors itself is unhealthy because the windows filter out the correct light, which means the signal that you're supposed to get from the sun, you're disturbing that, and so you're not getting the correct signal. So if you're working out indoors, yeah, that's a problem. Whether you're working out indoors or not working out indoors, it's a problem. But in terms of working out in general, and if you're going to do that, you should be outside. You do it ideally shirtless, even during the winter, by the way. Even during the winter. At least
Mm,
for me, I'm able to create heat, so I don't have any problems. But in any case, um, if you feel like it, if I feel like, oh, it would be really fun to go and do some pull-ups in the outside gym right now, or run, let's say. Sure, No problems there. Especially midday, noon when the sun is strong, mind is working well, muscles are working well. But usually athletic performance is best around 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. So usually that would be the best time. If you feel like it, your body's giving you that signal, just like a dog, wants to move, needs to go on a walk. Go ahead, go and work out. However, if you're someone who's very sick and tired, they don't feel like working out, they shouldn't work out because their body wants to rest. No one goes and works out. If you go and work out when you're sleepy, yeah, you're not listening to the thing that's a bit more smart than you in terms of making decisions about whether you should do these things or not. So that's how you approach working out. You listen to the body. But again, you need to make sure your diet is okay. You need to make sure your light habits are okay. You need to make sure you're not bombarding yourself with pollution or RF magnetic fields, electric fields, because otherwise those mechanisms don't work as well, and you won't
Mhm.
even want to work out in general because you'll be unhealthy. So yeah, many things to consider there.
I receive a lot of pushback and weird looks from doing these types of things from people in my environment, people online, so on and so forth. And I realize it's not rooted in logic. I mean, I can sit and tell them and explain to them this whole story. I find it's completely rooted in group consensus, right? Following what is normal. And I don't know, what is normal is obviously extremely toxic and is ruining our health. Um, so I just found that to be an interesting kind of like tension, let's say, that I've been going through my own life using doing these kinds of things. How have you experienced that in your own life?
So is the question that how is it that I'm able to do things that are not socially acceptable without feeling self-conscious? Is that the question?
The yes, we'll say that, yeah.
Okay. Um, Alexander the Great, I think there was a battle with a city that had a pretty high wall. I think he threw either it was a ladder or it was a rope. He threw it over the wall. He climbed up. He jumped down, and he was surrounded by all of these soldiers from enemy soldiers within the city, and his army was the wall was between them. He had climbed over by himself, um, you know, as an act of courage, and he was fighting them on his own. His soldiers got so inspired that they climbed over, um, and yeah, they climbed over because he did. They followed after him.
Mm,
And when I think about these things, when I think about how Maasai herders, they look at the lion as if it was a rat. They sit there with their spear and they look at the lion as if it was a rat. The lion is afraid of them. It would be afraid of me and you as well if we had a spear. Uh, you look at all these, tribes in the Amazon with all these things trying to kill them, and they've survived for thousands of years without any problems. And there's this when you have high dopamine and high testosterone levels, there's this feeling you have where nothing those things don't matter. You're at the top of the world. I go out and it's snowing and without the shirt on, maybe someone's looking at me. I don't care. It's y- 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 the way I'd explain it is my dopamine and testosterone are so high that the thought doesn't even occur to me. It's just fun. Now, is that the practical answer? No, that's the motivational answer. The practical answer is that I started walking shirtless when I was 17 around my environment after listening to maybe even before listening to Cruise, but especially after listening to Cruise. It was in the beginning of 2020 when I was 17. That was the first summer I really sunbathed a lot and got really really dark. Was I uncomfortable back then? Yes. The year after that, when the summer began, was I uncomfortable back then? Yes. At the end of the summer, in both cases, was I uncomfortable? No, because I was used to it. And when 2022 came, was I uncomfortable? Maybe a few times, not so much. When 2023 came, was I uncomfortable? No. Was I uncomfortable this year? Absolutely not. Have I become healthier since then? Have I, increased my testosterone, increased my dopamine levels? Yes. Um, have I trained for this? Have I done the social training required for me to not care? Yes. Is that a part of it? Yes. Am I inspired by Alexander the Great and all these wonderful figures throughout history who did things that are way, way more courageous than just these simple things that we do in modern society that are quite insignificant from the courage, the courage required? Yes. All those things play a role, but I will also say maybe this is the most important thing, or maybe the second most important thing. I think that testosterone and dopamine are really important, but the second most important thing is probably the amount of meditation I've done. Not meditation on a certain subject. That's not meditation. I mean, straight up meditation. Breath, body awareness. You can do sound. You can do. There are many practices you can do. Do nothing meditation. Zen style. When you rack those up, and you remove your sense of self, you lessen your sense of self. Socially speaking, like when I'm speaking to someone, there's no barrier really uh, anymore. It's like I've known them for. I can speak to someone and I've known them. It's like I've known them for 10 years. That's how it is for me now.
Mm.
It's this freedom you get from removing yourself from the equation that allows you to do a bunch of things. And that's, I think, if you go down the path, the path that Siddhartha laid out many thousands of years ago, but then it got turned into a religion, unfortunately. If you walk down that path, somewhere on the path, you'll start to feel immense freedom, and with
Mm.
that freedom comes, um, the social benefits and the benefits of not feeling self-conscious when you do things that go against modern society.
Last question. Do you believe in God?
I think anyone who says, or maybe I'm ignorant when I say this, but I think that yeah, I'll lay out my opinions. I have no beliefs. I don't believe in anything. I don't believe that there is a God. I don't believe that there is not a God. If someone says that they know God exists, they're a liar. If someone says that they know God doesn't exist, they're also a liar. The correct answer is that no one knows. You must not know this. Cannot know that. In terms of a creator, what people have referred to as God throughout the generations, let's say the masters, um, is the source of human experience itself, consciousness itself. But when I say consciousness, what we're doing right now isn't consciousness. We're conscious, but we're interpreting everything. We're interpreting the mind space, we're interpreting the body, we're interpreting the screen in front of us, we're interpreting the person. I need to interpret that this thing that you are even hearing me. I need to interpret the fact that I'm even speaking. I need to interpret these words. I need to interpret that my head is here and my hand is here. Those are all interpretations. And unless you make those interpretations, you won't have that experience. Now, what happens if you strip all of that away? Well, on the path, maybe you'll get there, but when you get there, it's something that you cannot put into words. Have I experienced it yet? No. Do I strive toward experiencing what that is? Yes. Will you get there eventually on the path? Yes. If you want to know more about what I'm talking about, you read the Book of Not Knowing by Peter Alston. I think that's one of the greatest, that is the greatest book ever written on the human experience. No one has delved as deep into how humans really work as Peter Alston. So Peter Alston is a name to write down if you want to know what the truth about the nature of reality is. That is my way of seeing things. All I know right now is that there is experience. That's it. That's the only truth. That's currently at my current state of consciousness, that's the only thing I can say for sure. There is experience. Not even that there is someone experiencing, no. There is experience.
It's kind of like similar to a Descartes, I think, therefore I am. You're denying. No,
No,
not even.
Descartes was wrong. Descartes was wrong. Because it's not because you think. You cannot think and still experience. When you're not thinking, where's the mind? The mind is another thought as well. There is no mind outside of thoughts.
Mm.
I'll explain it this way. Is there where do you go when you sleep? There's complete non-existence. There is nothing. It's completely black. There's nothing at all. In the same way, when you're not using the mind, the same thing happens. It completely ceases to exist. And so he made a fundamental mistake there of thinking that because he's thinking, there is a self. He was creating a self also through the thinking because he's identified with it. No, just because you're conscious doesn't mean that there is a self there. It might be that the self is a construct that's created through certain mental emotional patterns that are very important for your survival. And maybe it might be the case that when you break that down, you might see the truth of no self. Yes.
Mm.
So no, it's not. It's not the Descartes. No, it's not like that. It's more if you want to link it to certain people's teachings. You've got Siddhartha Gautama. You've got Lao Tzu. You've got even Buddha. You've got Dogen. You've got I'll give you some modern ones. You've got Jiddu Krishnamurti. You've got even UG Krishnamurti. You've got, to some degree, Eckhart Tolle. You've got Shinzen Young. And let's see, is there anyone? Ramana Maharshi. Ramana Maharshi is really big in India. Nisargadatta Maharaj is another one. Those are a few ones. Those are a few ones. We'll leave it at that. Those are a
Mm.
few good people to study, to listen to as well.
Okay. Anything you want to leave the viewer with? Saying any kind of message, takeaway messages?
It is good to be virtuous. No matter how you look at it, it is always good to be virtuous. And if someone doesn't know what virtue is the good qualities that a person has. So, humility, courage, integrity, um, honesty, even chastity, vigor is one of them, and that comes from health. Um, all of those, pursuing all of those, mastering those temperance, justice, mastering all of those not only has a wonderful impact on you, it has a wonderful impact on all the people around you and ultimately the world. And let me make it certain that you'd love to live in a world where everyone is virtuous. And so, through that understanding, realize that the more virtuous you are, the better you make the world for everyone else.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.